In chapter 1181, while Imu is fighting Loki, he pierces Loki's chest with a massive black blade, and while lecturing the prince about how humanity's desire for power leads to corruption and domination, Imu suddenly stops as he remembers JoyBoy, his silhouette still shaded and hidden from us, as Imu furiously exclaims, "Isn't that right, JoyBoy?" The latest One Piece chapter is titled God and Devil. In this video, we'll be arguing about the true tragedy of One Piece, which is we don't know which one is which. Imu believes that he's the god who punished the devil's arrogance. The world's history suggests otherwise. Then upon learning that Imu's sword is called Nemesis, this reveals that Imu can no longer see the difference anymore. In my recent videos, I spoke about Imu's body possession, as well as the fragmentation of his soul, which could be behind the Covenant system. In this video, I'll be focusing on an entirely new theory, which is the Nemesis mythology. What does the friendship between Imu and JoyBoy mean for the Void Century? What was JoyBoy's actual crime? And why is this fight between Imu and Loki the most thematically loaded confrontation in the series? There are a few people who Imu is still friends with. These are the individuals who are subscribed to the channel. Only 10% of the people who watch these videos are subscribed, so if you enjoy these One Piece theory and breakdown videos, then hit the bell notification and subscribe for even more content just like this. Most people will be discussing the Black Blade angle following chapter 1181. Imu has a black blade that puts him in the same tier as Mihawk and Ryuma. The power scaling implications are pretty huge, right? While this is really important, Imu manifests Nemesis mid-fight. This is after he increases the size of his body so that he is the same size as Loki. Imu uses a similar attack style to Mihawk, with only 2 other weapons in the series having achieved permanent Haki infusion. These of course are Yoru, which is wielded by Dracula Mihawk, and then Shusui, the sword that was formerly wielded by the legendary Wano samurai Shimotsuki Ryuma. Zoro wielded this sword up until the Wano arc, where he officially returned the Black Blade to Wano, as it was considered their national treasure. In exchange, he received the sword Enma. Imu sits alongside the world's greatest swordsman and the sword god of Wano, which tells us something important about the level of power that he is fighting at. A blade doesn't just turn black overnight, it takes sustained combat at the highest level, pouring Haki into the metal across so many clashes that your will becomes permanently embedded into the steel. The sword remembers everything that its wielder has fought for. If Nemesis turned black during the war against JoyBoy and the Ancient Kingdom, then the end of their friendship is physically recorded within the composition of the weapon Nemesis. While the power scaling is fascinating, I'm more interested in the name of Imu's sword, especially when you pair it with Imu's actual stated philosophy from this chapter. During the fight with Loki, Imu explains his worldview directly. He says that humanity's desire for power leads to corruption, that to obtain power easily, humans make pacts, and that when power, corruption, and pacts converge, the result is domination. Then he tells Loki that true happiness only comes under domination. A really interesting linguistic breakdown has been circulating amongst fans. Imu's black flames have been translated as omen within the Viz manga version, but the Japanese term is maki, and that word is a direct mirror of haki. Both words share the same root character of ki. This is spiritual energy or life force. The difference is what comes before it. The ha from haki means dominance, supremacy, overwhelming power, but in a positive sense. The ma from maki means demonic aura, darkness, a cursed or ominous force. But all of this is in a negative sense. Haki is a spiritual energy channeled through will and supremacy. Maki is spiritual energy channeled through corruption and demonic power. Oda's built the opposition between JoyBoy and Imu into the fundamental power system of One Piece. Haki and Maki are not separate abilities that happen to conflict. They are the same energy that split because of the same reason that divided two friends 800 years ago. JoyBoy's legacy to humanity was Maki, the power of will, ambition, the spirit to refuse to submit. Imu's legacy is Maki, the power of domination, cursed binding, as well as the demonic force that compels submission. When JoyBoy stored Conqueror's Haki blasted the 5 elders off Egghead and made Imu collapse screaming from hundreds of miles away, this was not a random power interaction. Haki counters Maki because they were always two sides of the same coin. They were forged within a friendship that shattered because of a betrayal. betrayal. Now this reframes Imu's philosophy from chapter 1181. He says power leads to corruption, but the Japanese encoding of Imu's abilities literally contains the character for corruption. The power system Imu uses is linguistically defined as the corrupted version of the power system that JoyBoy spread across the world. His stated philosophy about power leading to corruption is a description of what happened to him, but projected outward onto everyone else. We can theorize that Imu analyzed what his own grief had transformed his ki into. It became demonic, cursed, and ominous. This must have led him to conclude that this is what all power inevitably becomes. But the truth might be that it's what his power became because of what JoyBoy's betrayal did to him. Now there's an important question you need to think throughout this entire video. Is Imu right? Or is Imu hiding behind a philosophical framework that's pretending to be wisdom, when in actuality it's all a cover for his grief? Now the Nemesis mythology, which I'll talk about, supports both of these angles at the same time, so whichever one you believe determines how you understand all of One Piece. Nemesis is a Greek goddess. She's not one of the Olympians that everyone learns about in school, which include Zeus, Athena, Apollo. She is in fact older than that, more primal, as Nemesis is the daughter of Nyx, which literally translates to night. She was born from primordial darkness itself, existing before the Olympian gods ever established their hierarchy. She predates the entire ruling order of Greek mythology, the same way Imu predates the celestial dragons, the five elders, and every governmental institution currently running the world of One Piece. The Nyx connection runs even deeper. In Greek cosmology, Nyx was so powerful that even Zeus feared her. She represented the fundamental darkness that existed before creation, before order, and before the gods divided the world into domains. Her children, Nemesis, who was among them, embodied the raw forces of existence that predate civilized religion. Thanatos embodied death. Hypnos embodied sleep, Eris embodied strife, and Nemesis was retribution. These aren't gods that you pray to for favors. These are the forces that happen to you whether if you want them to or not. Imu's entire existence follows this pattern. He isn't a ruler that people chose. He's a force that was imposed upon the world through the aftermath of catastrophe. Nobody elected Imu, hence why they believe that the empty throne is a real concept. He emerged from the void century the same way Nemesis emerged from the primordial night. They are both consequences of events that are so old that they are embedded within the very structure of reality, which explains why nobody knows that Imu exists. Nemesis has one extremely specific domain. She doesn't punish crime broadly. She's not a goddess of justice in the general sense. Nemesis punishes hubris. This is specific to arrogance that is done before the gods, mortals who overreach, people who grab for power before their station, so anyone who believes that their own righteousness exempts them from natural consequences. Her name translates directly to give what is due. She also had another title, Adrastia, which means the inescapable, retribution that you cannot outrun regardless of how far you sail or how deep you hide. In some traditions, Nemesis was also associated with the concept of divine envy. This is the idea that excessive good fortune attracts cosmic punishment, because the universe demands a balance. If someone rises too high, Nemesis pulls them back down. The same is true for if someone accumulates too much power, joy, success, the scales have to be corrected. If this description doesn't sound exactly like Imu's view of JoyBoy, a man whose very name means joy, whose power liberated nations, whose legend inspired worship across centuries, then I don't know what else does. In Imu's eyes, JoyBoy was the ultimate example of someone who rose too high, and Imu made himself the force that pulled him back to earth. The most famous myth linked to Nemesis is when she punished a man named Narcissus. He was so consumed by his own beauty and brilliance that he rejected every person who tried to love him. He believed that he was above connection with lesser beings. So Nemesis caused him to fall in love with his own reflection in a pool of water. Narcissus spent the rest rest of his life staring at himself, wasting away, unable to look away from the image of his own perfection. He died kneeling at the water's edge, enslaved by his self-obsession which had defined him. Now keep this story in your mind as we're going to come back to it. There is another additional detail in classic Greek artwork. Nemesis is consistently depicted as a winged figure. Her most common attributes are scales, a measuring rod, and a bridle resembling restraint. And in certain depictions of Nemesis we also see a sword. Imu sprouted massive black wings during his transformation in chapter 1179. We also see them in the next chapter where he flies across all of the holy knights assisting them, and now in the most latest chapter 1181, Imu now carries a sword called Nemesis, and through the Covenant system, Imu has spent 8 centuries weighing the worth of every person on the planet and deciding their fate from a throne that no one else can see. Oda is very deliberate with his naming, which means that visual, functional, and thematic parallels are very direct and deliberate. So what does naming your weapon Nemesis tell us about how Imu views himself? It implies that he sees himself as the agent of divine retribution, the one who delivers what is owed. He thinks that he is the consequence which someone else has earned through their own reckless arrogance. In Imu's version of the Void Century, he isn't the villain, he is the response. JoyBoy committed some catastrophic act of hubris. He overstepped, played God, gambled with forces that should never have been touched, and everything that Imu has done since has been retribution. From the institutions that he has built, from the history that he has erased, from every D-carrier that he has hunted, it has all served that singular purpose. Imu's sword Nemesis is a statement of his identity that has been forged within the Haki-infused steel. No wonder he says, "I am the consequence of your arrogance." While the sword tells us how Imu views himself, it does not tell us whether he's right, because naming your sword after divine retribution is something that a justified Avenger does, but it's also something that a delusional tyrant would do to sanctify his own cruelty. Imu has had 800 years of unchallenged rule to construct a narrative where he is the wronged party. Every other person who knew the truth, which includes the 19 founders, the scholars, JoyBoy himself, they're all dead. The only account of the Void Century that survived seems to be the one that Imu allowed to survive. So when we read the name Nemesis and conclude Imu believes JoyBoy betrayed him, the follow-up question has to be, does he believe it's because it's true, or because he spent 800 years editing his own memory until the grief felt like he was doing justice? Some of you may be wondering, does Oda have the mythological depth to pull this off intentionally? Well, he is the same man who named attack techniques after Norse realms, who based an entire arc around the structure of Yggdrasil, who had built Fishman Island mythology around Poseidon, who modeled the Gorosei transformations after specific Japanese yokai, and who had given a character the Akuma no Mi, literally the devil's fruit. Some fans have theorized this is the singular origin point of every other devil fruit classification. Oda has been layering mythology into One Piece since the very first chapter. Naming Imu's blade Nemesis is as deliberate as naming Loki's fruit Nidhogg. We've been wondering for a long time, what does Imu want? Many had assumed that he wanted power, control, or dominion over the world because he craves it. But with the revelation that Imu was once friends with JoyBoy and that his sword is called Nemesis, the question now becomes what was done to Imu? And then immediately after, does what was done to Imu justify what he's done to everyone else? Nemesis punishes hubris. If JoyBoy contributed to the destruction of the world through his arrogance, then Imu's anger is warranted. But Nemesis also punishes Narcissus, a man so convinced of his own perfection that he couldn't see anything beyond his own reflection. Ironically, Imu has spent 800 years staring at his own reflection, unable to see what he has become. In chapter 1179, Imu states, "Why do JoyBoy and Davy Jones continue to make me suffer?" Before chapter 1181, this sounded like a king irritated by persistent rebellion. Now we read it as a man who lost 2 people he knew personally during the Void Century, and he keeps seeing their ghosts in new faces. Luffy inherited JoyBoy's will, Rox inherited Davy Jones' lineage, Roger stood in the same spot JoyBoy once occupied. Chapter 906, we see a frozen vault beneath Pangaea Castle. Imu is standing silently before the massive preserved straw hat, which is kept in cold storage deep underground. If JoyBoy truly is his friend from before the world broke, then the hat isn't a trophy from a defeated enemy, as it belongs to someone that Imu once cared about, someone who is dead because of choices that they both made. And it's interesting that Imu preserved the hat and has it within a frozen chamber beneath the seat of world power. It's obvious that he can't let go of JoyBoy. In chapter 908, we see the photographs of Luffy, Blackbeard, Shirahoshi, and Vivi. Imu slashes through the first two as he stabs Shirahoshi's with his saber, and he keeps Vivi's intact. We know that Nefertari Lily was one of the original 20 founders, and she carries the D initial, and that she scattered the poneglyphs to preserve the truth that Imu wanted destroyed. She was Imu's ally who chose JoyBoy's side. Vivi carries that very betrayal within her bloodline. She is living proof of someone that Imu trusted who chose JoyBoy's vision of the world over his. At God Valley, Rox claimed his ancestor David E. Jones was the true king of the world. Imu erupted in anger, denying that Jones was ever king for even a moment. Then Rox pushed further. He mentioned a promise that bound Imu and Davy Jones together. This is some ancient promise or debt between them that predates the world government. And Imu's response to hearing that word promise was to turn Rox into a demon and to order him to murder his own wife and infant son. He demanded the complete eradication of the Davy bloodline so that neither of them, as he refers to JoyBoy and Davy Jones here, would ever return. JoyBoy's will was passed to Roger, then to Luffy. Davy Jones's bloodline passed to Rox, then to Blackbeard. Imu never uses anyone's name. He calls Luffy Nika. He calls Loki Nidhogg. He calls Rox Davy Jones. He addresses people by their ancestral titles, treating them as eternal reincarnating roles rather than individual human beings. And with the friendship context, this stops being a quirk of his personality and starts looking like a coping mechanism. If Imu acknowledged that Luffy is Luffy, a 19-year-old kid from the East Blue who likes meat, then he'd have to confront the reality that he's been waging a 800-year-old grudge against children who have no idea why he hates them. But within Imu's mind, if Luffy is Nika, if Loki is Nidhogg, if Rox is Davy Jones, then Imu is still fighting his original enemies. For him, the war never ended. Imu's grief appears to be real. Losing JoyBoy clearly broke something in him that never healed. Imu might have been wronged by JoyBoy, and he might have also done things during the Void Century that provoked whatever JoyBoy did. We only have Imu's framing on this matter, as well as the name that he had chosen for his sword. It seems as though the story of One Piece maps to this very core. Two people who shared something real reaching a point where their paths split so violently that the world around them also was torn apart. Luffy and Blackbeard both carry D, as they crave absolute freedom, but Luffy's freedom is communal. He wants everyone around him to be free too. Blackbeard's freedom is predatory. His freedom requires other people's subjugation. This parallels Rox and Roger, who competed for the crown of their era. The God Valley flashbacks from Elbaf showed Rox visiting Harold's kingdom, sharing drinks, making recruitment pitches. There was mutual respect there before they fell out. Garp and Roger were rivals, but when Roger needed someone to protect his unborn child, the person that he had trusted the most was the Marine who had spent decades trying to arrest him. Corazon and Doflamingo grew up in the same family of exiled celestial dragons. They experienced the same persecution, hunger, and violence, but they emerged with visions of the world that were so incompatible that one of them had to die for the other to move forward. Ace and Blackbeard were crewmates on the same ship before ambition and murder turned them into mortal enemies. Even Jaguar D. Soul and the world government followed this pattern, a marine giant who loved his institution until it ordered him to participate in genocide, forcing him to choose between loyalty and his conscience. All of these examples that I have chosen are smaller echoes of what JoyBoy and Imu endured, and the specific genius of what Oda is doing here is that he has been teaching us the emotional lessons of the Void Century across the 27 years of storytelling within One Piece. When we finally get that full JoyBoy and Imu flashback, we'll already understand a lot of the beats because of the stories that we have witnessed. Some fans have started drawing the Madara and Hashirama comparison to JoyBoy and Imu. Now, we need to start theorizing about what JoyBoy actually did. We know Imu believes that power leads to corruption and that domination is the answer to this, but we don't know what JoyBoy specifically did. Was JoyBoy's hubris real, or is Imu the one who's been deluding himself? There is a version of this story where JoyBoy genuinely overstepped and caused a catastrophe, and Imu's retribution was the correct response to a crisis. There is another version where JoyBoy's actions were justified and Imu's grief warped a reasonable disagreement into 800 years of tyranny. But there's also a third version, possibly the most Oda version possible, where JoyBoy's actions were both justified but catastrophic at the same time, where the liberation was necessary and the cost was unbearable and neither friend was entirely wrong. This is the version where the tragedy hits the hardest. There's no clear villain and a clear hero here, but two people who are both right about different things and they couldn't reconcile those truths. Within the Harley text, we learn that the first world depicts a unified landmass where humanity exploited a forbidden sun. Nika descended, the earth god raged and shattered the world. The first world ends with they will never meet. The second world depicts expansion and war. JoyBoy rose, the 20 kings murdered him, the seas flooded everything, and the second world ends with they will never meet. The third world prophesizes reunion, as it ends with they will surely meet. JoyBoy and Imu existed together in this history. Imu and JoyBoy must have witnessed the exploitation and injustice in the world that was described within the Harley text. They both must have wanted to change things, but based upon Imu naming his sword Nemesis, combined with the fact that they were friends, it seems as though they disagreed on the method to implement to fix the world. From the Nemesis naming, we can infer that JoyBoy's crime has to involve overreach, because this is what Nemesis punishes, and the Harley text provides the framework for what that overreach had looked like. We need to think about what the Forbidden Sun actually was. The Harley text uses the phrase Forbidden Sun in the context of the First World's civilization exploiting it with slave labor. Vegapunk spent years trying to build the Mother Flame, an energy source that would replicate whatever power the ancient kingdom once wielded. When the Mother Flame was used to power whatever ancient weapon erased the Leluzia kingdom from the map, 16 beams of light descended from the sky and annihilated the entire island. Fans rightly pointed out that this looked like a weapon of mass destruction on the scale of a nuclear strike, and this was a replica of a weapon from the ancient kingdom era. The original Forbidden Sun was presumably far more powerful, dangerous, and more tempting to anyone who believed that they could wield it reasonably. JoyBoy wanted to use this power to liberate the enslaved, and on the surface that's a noble goal. The slaves being exploited in the First World deserved freedom. Nika's descent to help them is depicted as righteous within the Harley text, but there's a gap between Nika descending as a liberator and JoyBoy deciding to weaponize the Forbidden Sun itself. Nika was on a rescue mission while JoyBoy is playing God with a power that the Harley text calls forbidden, a word that Oda had chosen deliberately. We can theorize Imu warned JoyBoy that using the Forbidden Sun would cause collateral destruction on a scale that liberation just couldn't justify, that the weapon doesn't discriminate between slavers and slaves, oppressors and the innocent. So we theorize that JoyBoy did it anyway, because JoyBoy is the same fundamental type of person as Luffy, someone who trusts their gut over everyone else's calculations. Luffy always acts on conviction first and measures the damage later. JoyBoy's intentions were pure, his confidence in those intentions was absolute, but it's this very absolute confidence that the Nemesis exists to punish. The result would have been the Great Flood. The Harley describes the seas rising, the land being divided, the world being shattered into the fragmented geography that we see today. The red line, which the giants describe as a hellflame serpent that wrapped around the globe. This could itself be a scar from the catastrophe, a geological formation created by the misuse of the Forbidden Sun's power. JoyBoy's liberation attempt restructured the entire planet, and the people JoyBoy was trying to save died alongside the people he was trying to fight. He broke his promise to Fishman Island. We know this from the poneglyph Robin read in the Sea Forest. JoyBoy left a letter of apology for failing to fulfill his end of a bargain which involved Noah and Poseidon. If his plan involved the ancient weapons, if it relied on Poseidon cooperating with a strategy that ultimately ultimately failed because the Forbidden Sun's power exceeded what JoyBoy could control, then the apology does make sense. He overestimated his ability to manage the forces that he had set in motion, and by the time he realized it, the damage was already done. But again, all of this is interpretation from Imu's perspective, or at least the version that the Nemesis naming points towards. It's possible JoyBoy's actions were more measured than this theory suggests, and that Imu's retribution was a disproportionate response to a reasonable disagreement. We won't know until Oda shows us the flashback, but the sword name tells us Imu framed the story as hubris deserving punishment, and that the world he built afterward tells us how far he was willing to go in order to enforce this framing of the world. So to ensure that nobody ever has the power to do what JoyBoy did again, the world government was created, the celestial dragons were installed as divine aristocracy, the deliberate erasure of the Void Century was done to prevent anyone from learning how to repeat JoyBoy's catastrophe, as well as the hunting of D-carriers because they inherit JoyBoy's stubborn conviction that their personal sense of justice outweighs any cost. The Covenant system chaining the world's strongest warriors to a single throne, all of this reads as a massive prevention system of JoyBoy's original sin, which was arrogance, which led to civilization-ending consequences. While Imu is trying to prevent hubris, he has committed the most staggering act of hubris within all of One Piece. He declared himself the sole ruler of a world built on the promise of shared governance. He sits on an empty throne, the monument that the 20 founders constructed as a symbol that no one person should ever rule. Imu himself has erased entire civilizations, enslaved nations through the Covenant system, he's called himself God, and he has done every single thing that he has accused JoyBoy of doing, but he's done it on a much worse scale, and he has for over 800 years. If you think about how JoyBoy tried to liberate people using a forbidden power and ended up destroying the world, while Imu tried to prevent liberation using a different forbidden power, which is soul fragmentation, covenant binding, the Akuma no Mi devil fruit power that he has, which ended up enslaving the world. JoyBoy's arrogance was thinking that he had the right to break the world for freedom. Imu's arrogance is thinking that he has the right to cage the world for order. JoyBoy gambled millions of lives on the belief that freedom was worth any price. Imu gambled millions of lives on the belief that control was worth any price. If you look at Imu's covenant abilities, they seem like they were inspired by the betrayal that he endured at the hands of JoyBoy. The Covenant system ensures that betrayal is physically impossible. Harold experienced the consequences of the Covenant system directly. He genuinely wanted to cooperate with Imu. He shaved his horns, negotiated trade agreements, served faithfully as a devoted blade, and the moment that Imu demanded something Harold couldn't accept, the enslavement of his own people, the Covenant stripped Harold's agency entirely. His body started to move against his own will. His personality was overwritten. Once choice is removed, the option for betrayal is also non-existent. The latest chapter of One Piece ends with Loki embedding Imu into the Adam Tree and blasting Thorheim while in his dragon form. Imu survives as he smiles, stating, "So you have returned." Is Imu talking to Loki directly, or does he recognize the return of the warrior god who was the previous wielder of Nidhogg that had fought Nika centuries ago? Or is he talking to JoyBoy, seeing the spirit of his old friend manifested through Loki's defiance? Or is he addressing the Nidhogg fruit itself, the power which Imu knew was hidden on Elbaf, the one force capable of destroying the Red Line and unraveling everything the world government was built to protect? Imu's philosophy of power leads to corruption, pacts enable power, domination which is the end result. This is going to be directly contradicted by Luffy's approach to alliances. Luffy forms pacts with everyone that he meets, whether if they are fishmen, giants, samurai, minks, or revolutionaries, but his pacts don't generate domination because they aren't motivated by power, they are instead motivated by mutual care. Also, you could theorize that Imu's Nemesis blade will be broken or turned against him before the end of the series. If the sword embodies retribution for hubris, and Imu has become the most hubristic force in the world, then the blade's mythological function demands it to be used on its own wielder. It would be really cool to see Zoro do this. You could theorize that the Void Century flashback is going to show that Imu's version of events is partially true. JoyBoy did in some way overreach. The catastrophe that unfolded was real, and people died because of JoyBoy JoyBoy's choices. But the flashback will also show that Imu's response was disproportionate by orders of magnitude. But yeah, I absolutely loved chapter 1181. We've had a solid stretch of incredible One Piece chapters recently, but I'd love to know all of your thoughts in the comments. Do you think JoyBoy genuinely betrayed Imu, or has Imu spent 800 years hiding his grief behind wisdom? I do have other videos on the channel where I talk about Imu possessing the body of JoyBoy, and another theory where I speak about Imu fragmenting his soul across all of the different Covenant users. So do go and check those videos out after this one. Lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this one, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.